Hello and welcome. You're listening to The Next Page, the podcast of the Librarian Archives dedicated to advancing the conversation on multilateralism. We're back after the summer break, and today we're having a special episode with Francesco Pisano, who has served as the director here at the Librarian Archives for almost a decade. We're catching Francesco at an exciting time of transition on this, his penultimate day in office. So in some ways, Francesco, it's a goodbye, perhaps an au revoir, at this time when you're relaying the baton of an institution within an institution. That's the Librarian Archives at UN Geneva. And the purpose of this institution, the library, is as valid today as when it was founded in 1919, which is to serve as a centre of research and as an instrument of international understanding. So in this conversation, we decided we'd talk a little bit about why knowledge matters and how it guides international action and what it means to provide leadership in an age where the management and democratization of knowledge is so critical. So Francesco, welcome, and I'm glad to have you on the other side today.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of special to be on this side of the mic for once, not to be the podcaster, but to be the guest. But I'm very honored. This is certainly a special moment for me in my professional life. I am quitting the United Nations Secretariat after 32 years of activities in 10 different jobs tomorrow at the end of the day. So this is my penultimate day in office. And I'm glad that this is happening because the podcast is one of the knowledge vehicles that we created for our audience that I perhaps cherish the most. We did it really on the margins of our capacities with a credit card and an internet, website to store the audio files in the beginning. Then we saw it worked and then we continued. So yeah, thank you for organizing this, Amy. Thank you for inviting me on this side of the mic. And yeah, let's dive in.
This is very much your home because, as you said, you founded this podcast. But I had noticed throughout the time working with you that in some ways knowledge has been a sort of guiding thread throughout your professional life. So I wondered if you could share with us how this thread began and how it's woven itself through your different stages of your career.
Yeah, that is true. Actually, now that you say it, it is true. Knowledge has always been sort of a link between the various jobs I've done. And I started in strategic studies. I was an analyst when I was out of university. So my job was to develop bodies of knowledge where this knowledge was missing. And in particular, I was an expert, so to say, in all matters, East and West, and where the Soviet Union may go if it disgregated one day, which then it happened. And that was, the first time that I encountered this question that is almost a question of epistemology. How do we know what we know? How do we know that we know things? How do we know that this is not just information not being systematized yet? And so it's not knowledge, it's pieces of data, they're bits of things. And this is the first time, and I was much younger then, but the problem at hand was so complex, geostrategic equilibriums projected in the future, that it was clear to me that knowledge was much more, at many more dimensions, just the simple ones that one can find in a simple, university education program. And so then when I went into international careers, he followed me in a way, or I followed it. I don't know how it happened, but it's true that all my jobs had this link with knowledge, either coming from technology, in the case of satellite analysis, or coming from other bodies of knowledge, the archives, the library. I worked in UNITAR knowledge for knowledge to lead was our motto. It's a tremendous institution there that really puts knowledge at the center. Maybe that's the thing. Where is knowledge in an organizational culture or in a personal career? Where on the map? It could be at the center, it could be a little bit out of sight, it could be at the periphery, it could be out of your radar screen. And so that makes a huge difference, yeah.
Listening to you, I was going to sort of start with a question saying that today's geopolitics and multilateral diplomacy is very fast moving, but listening to you talk about coming out of university and the first moves and the changes that we've had, things have always been fast moving, but we do get a sense that things are almost accelerating now. And I don't know if it's real or if we're just sensing that. But, you've just mentioned UNITAR putting knowledge at the center. Is that how you really see the position of knowledge now?
I think I don't know if I can answer that question specifically. What I see is that for most people, knowledge is the centerpiece of is almost at the top of the pinnacle. But actually, what's at the top is wisdom. The way we apprehend knowledge, the way we learn, and the why we want to learn is to, let's give an example, take better decisions, sharing only what is authentic and validated. But there is wisdom there. We tend to use knowledge to tend towards wisdom. And so if you see things from that point of view, really taking a philosophical approach, it doesn't matter that the world is accelerated, and it is indeed. I don't think that we're just sensing because we're old as human beings, or old as machines. It's really going faster. But if you keep an eye on the data and information, you get dizzy. But if you keep an eye on wisdom, is there an acceleration in wisdom in our societies? Do we produce wisdom faster than before? I don't think so. I actually think we tend to produce less wisdom for cubic meter of information. Maybe because some of that information is unusable or put out there on purpose to confuse minds or outright fake. And so our productivity in terms of net wisdom per unit of information is actually, it's questionable whether it's growing or not. But when I look at things, I always look from the top. So if from the top, what is the end result that is hoped for is wisdom and better decisions that last longer in complex systems require wisdom. Then wisdom require a process to be generated that involves high doses of validated knowledge. And that comes from good commodities in terms of information and data. Now, what we have in our world and also international organization, we have a surge of data. Data is not yet information. Is without analysis, it's just data. And we have a surge of data across international organization and not in the public sector, private sector, it doesn't matter. And we tend to eat this raw material and increase in speed through outlets like social media, for example. And so we are basically overfed on data. And I think that one thing that we're doing wrong is to stop and see what is the actual optimal interaction between humans and machines, and let machines do what they do best, to spare the time for us to do what we know best, produce wisdom and take decisions that last longer. So it's a little bit like you and I belong to a generation that went through, you shall not use calculators at school during exams, to, yes, of course, use calculators because you have better use of your time than just doing all the numbers, right? So it's the same, but we get there with a certain pace, which is relatively slow in our societies. And with technology accelerating, that pace feels even slower. But there are things at stake that are of importance to the entire planet. Climate change, all the global crises that we have put ourselves into, including migration, inequalities, the queen of all crises, the crisis of inequality, the surge of inequalities. So we can do so much better, but we have to eat less data as humans. Let the machines with 5G eat the data. Now everybody's scared because machines can be manipulated, and we can design algorithms, and then everybody says, no, don't leave it all to machines. But do you really think that this is stoppable or changeable? So machines are there to crunch on data. We are here to dedicate more focus and be more intentional on generating knowledge and using knowledge for wisdom and the right decisions. There is a set of decisions that want to be taken by us as humans that we're still not taken.
Exactly. Yeah. And critical thinking. But you're talking about the advances in technology in particular. And I think that quite often when we think about libraries, knowledge is seen as something very static. And we think of archives and documents and databases, stacks full of books, that sort of thing. I've noticed working with you that you really emphasize knowledge as this living, dynamic, perhaps even transformative thing. Could you share an example of where centering knowledge changed the way things unfolded?
Yeah, I absolutely. I think, coming to your point, the knowledge is not static, but it's dynamic. For me, it is. That's the way I see it. It's definitely dynamic. I link it on the one hand to learning, because learning is where one of the major ways in which we accumulate knowledge is to learn, and also to unlearn, because a mature adult will know that unlearning certain things unblocks and unleashes knowledge accumulation. So learning and unlearning gives dynamics to knowledge. One example, I think the best example I can bring to the podcast is LaunchPad, the big project that lasts 4 years here in Library Archives to digitize the entire collection of the League of Nations. So a body of knowledge of archives that is entire, so as a beginning and an end, 14 million pages. And our plan was to digitize everything and putting it out there. It's a perfect example because not only the knowledge was not really globally accessible, because you had to come to Geneva, book a moment with our research archivist who go to a physical place, grab a physical box and get the papers to you. But it was also, not only that, it was also old by old standards. In this era, time and age of shiny technology, these papers, almost a century old, what kind of interest they can have? Well, once they were digitized and we put it out there literally in the open, help you into our files, we changed the world of research in international affairs. And there are hundreds of researchers around the world right now as we speak, intent upon digging into these files and doing a sort of archaeology of truths that we have willingly forgotten or tried to erase from the history of international relations, or for other reasons not taking into account for decades. And so these truths are part of the global knowledge of international relations. So what happens when you look at, there is a truth, there is knowledge there, but when you erode this knowledge, your capacity to create wisdom is reduced. And then your decisions will have a shorter lifespan, or in the worst case scenario, lead to problems, conflict, attrition, etc. So that is a perfect example of a body of knowledge kept away from the public eye, from the public, not accessible through technology instruments in its majority. We had a number of files that had been digitized over the years, but not the entire 14 million pages. That changes the story, basically, the story of research in international affairs. But here's the thing. Things become always other things. So when you change the story in research on international affairs, you're also changing international affairs. Sooner or later, it will take a time, but that's what you're doing. And here, I must say, I'm not sure we all realize in this team the sense of pride and achievement that this can bring. It will probably reveal itself in its entirety a little bit later down the road. But that's the example.
Perfect. Yes. And I remember you saying we don't recognize the scale of this and of what we've done. But you were saying yesterday, talking with colleagues online in a meeting, that no one would really quite believe that you would be able to get the millions of dollars that we needed to make PDFs.
Right. Yeah. Money always follows good ideas, and good ideas have this way of showing up, and humans recognize a good idea when they see one. And then there may be other malevolent intentions in stopping good ideas, but they have this habit of coming back, even if you try to stop them. And something that I always share with my colleagues is this: are we capable still in all this noise to listen to the system or the systems? There are a number of things that want to happen across the system. They just want to happen. And very often humans use their powers to steer reality, the things that they want to happen in one way or the other. But that slows down the process, but it doesn't stop things from happening in the end. So I think successful organizations have this, they're attuned to what wants to emerge in their system, and they go with it. Instead of behaving like salmons, swimming upstream, getting there and dying, they swim with the flow, not in the sense of passivity, but in the sense of wider awareness of where the whole system is moving to. And I think this is so fundamental for organizations that are as big, as old as the UN.
Yeah, and I think we're already starting to see the fruits coming from opening the access to this immense amount of knowledge, and the way that researchers are bringing different paradigms and perspectives to the information that is there, and being able to use that in a different way that has been, as you said, transformative of the way international relations is done. So yes, you said how you started out your first role in your career as an analyst, and I was thinking then about the broader role of knowledge and diplomacy, not just as a storehouse, but how we can use that and highlight knowledge as a strategic asset for cooperation and as a way of leveling the playing field among actors who may otherwise have very, very unequal resources.
Absolutely. This brings us back to the work we do as Library Archives within the UN. We are civil servants. We work for the UN. We work in the Secretariat of the UN. We are a institution inside the UN. And so we have member states, and not all member states are equal. And when you put it on the knowledge, in the knowledge field, it was very clear since the beginning of the United Nations, even clearer with the process of decolonization through the 60s and 70s, that knowledge was not available in equal manner throughout the spectrum. And for example, to mention UNITAR again, I love UNITAR because it was born in my year, 1963, by UN resolution. And this was a call for new countries, new in the sense that they joined the UN recently in the 60s as out of the process of decolonization, to have an institute that worked for them in the knowledge field, training and knowledge and research. And so it's no secret, and it's not incorrect to say that knowledge has been distributed throughout the spectrum of the United Nations member states, not equally over the decades. And that makes it important for library archives that work for these institutions, the United Nations system, to be intentional about what we do to mobilize knowledge for member states. So some member states, small countries in particular, are a living force of multilateralism, and they are a living force of the United Nations as an organization that hold the majority of seats in General Assembly. So it's not a question of helping countries that are poor in knowledge. That is not the thing. It's not poor. The question is how you mobilize knowledge for what purpose. And I like this image that you introduced of leveling the play field, leveling the sense of giving opportunities in equal manners to all the players to access knowledge that is available, validated, and pertinent, relevant to what the UN has to do. So are we seeing an increase in the quality of UN resolution drafts because of the readily accessible knowledge that there is now as opposed to 30 years ago? Yes, we're seeing that. Are we seeing diplomats probably trying drafts with AI tools to already eliminate, a few drafts that will not take off, but even approach the runway during negotiations? Yes, and that is a good thing. We shouldn't be fearful of AI if we contextualize it and find the equilibrium between humans and machines. So absolutely, knowledge is important for member states. Not all member states have equal access to knowledge, and we should work in that space as librarians and activists of the UN to enable our member states to do the best they can together in the space that exists between data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. That is the food chain. And everybody gets there one way or the other. But your wisdom may be very weak on iron and certain vitamins because they were not in the raw material that you had access to. And mine could be overinflated on protein and sugar. And so that kind of wisdom is less usable when you and I converge at the table of negotiation on a pivotal resolution in the General Assembly room or the Commission or, whatever that may be. Specialized agencies is the same case. So we see that, international panels like the one on climate change, for example, do that work of bringing to the front certified scientific knowledge. We all agree, the panel agree that this is true and this is not true. And that is a typical example of how member states could equip themselves with potent information translator and knowledge, generators to get to the wisdom stage faster and together.
I hope we do also have the will to move to the wisdom stage. You've talked now about your role and your mission and not just safeguarding knowledge and creating it, but also this mobilization of knowledge. Let's move on to leadership. What, in your experience, does leadership for knowledge actually look like?
I think knowledge and leadership are really intertwined. So you can look at leadership through the lens of knowledge. You can look at knowledge through the lens of leadership. When you look at these two and how they combine in complex systems and an organization, and the UN is a complex organization for the UN system even more so, you see that when there is high accessibility to knowledge and knowledge sharing, so not the knowledge as a stockpile, locked up in some place where one or a few people hold the key, that is information. The old saying, information is power. That sentence is abruptly cut. Information is power when shared, not when kept. It's a typical mistake. It's actually when we mistake authority for leadership, we're doing the same shortcut in our brains. Because this person is the highest salary in the room, that's the leader. Nothing is far from the truth. In many cases, actually, you see a lot of persons in position of authority that have very little leadership skills, for example. So this sharing is fundamental. Static knowledge produces much, much less wisdom, and it produces in isolated places across the system, and that is not going to work, basically. So when you have good, intentional, knowledge-based leadership in an organization, there are things that are immediately happening organically through the system. The first is better decisions. You see that immediately. If you make that magic work, you will have in the next reporting cycle a flurry of decisions that hold water, that they are long-lasting, they appear to be fairer, sounder, better understood by everybody. And that is proven by tons of literature on leadership. The second thing that is happening is that because knowledge is shared and it is available throughout the system, then you have better collaboration. Now, and here's the most powerful secret in terms of leadership is that a culture of collaboration will bring an organization to its maximum potential of output, even if leaders are rather average. So you could have the best leading personality or leading team. You could have this leadership mindset throughout the ranks of an organization and have no culture of collaboration. You will be worse off than an organization with very average leadership positions, but a culture of collaboration. And so that is something that becomes apparent in all experiences and experiments in the discipline of leadership. And there are many articles, scientific articles, that would prove that based on clinical data. Where is the catch? Is that old organizations, and the UN is one of them, we're 8 years old, have a tendency to lean on what is past, what we have learned, our rules, and the rules sediment and they gives rigidity to the joints of the organization. So the work of leadership in knowledge is to lean forward, to rub your shoulders at the front end of knowledge. What is that we know to help us decide, navigate the uncertainty to come. So I'm totally looking forward, and I'm rubbing shoulders to the very limit, this kind of zone of turbulence where I feel not completely at ease because I don't know what's coming, and I know I have to push that knowledge to its usability limit. These are organizations that are referred to as learning organizations. I know what I know. Remember epistemology. How do I know what I know, really? Is it really true what I know? And as I go into this, I'm learning all the time. So my knowledge base now is expanding. And that gives me access to new forms of wisdom or new forms to interlink particular wisdom. In a way, international collaboration and multilateralism is nothing but a cooperation of the minds. And so minds are all about knowledge. So once we discover this, then it cannot be unknown. It cannot be unlearned. It's something that is really transformative. Now, why it's not happening? I think it's not happening because you said the word, the political will, the will, you said the will, not political will. I will add political. The political will to go forward, despite the past, must form in the players that hold an organization together. So if we are an association, that would be for the association members to develop. If we are an international organization, it would be for member states to develop. So that is work to be done. And I think that in international affairs, we have for a very long time thought that it's all about power dynamics. And what if we weren't? What if the name of the game has been for 100 years, power dynamics, so 200 years, I give it to you, 300 years, 400 since Westphalia. And what is that is not the game for the future? What is that doesn't get us out of migration, inequalities, and climate change? So what is needed there is more modesty, more what is the work to be done? And in a way, in power dynamics, the most powerful do the decision and all the others are resting on the couch. There is work to do. The system needs to get down to work, hard work. And taking the right decisions for the future is hard work. It means giving up on some expectations and saying, no, this is what we need to do. We're having examples in this difficult year, 2025, that shows the contrary. We are not taking the right decisions. We're relying on systems that are dogmatic. So the dogma of, the most power, the dogma of hegemony, basically. That's a story we all believe in international affairs. But that is also precluding possibilities for the future. So one thing that I think is not happening is the system is not doing the hard work. It's not working hard enough. There is work to be done. And those in power, I'm not talking about people, I'm talking about parts of the system that have power, including the private sector, has the most money in the world. Most money is not in the coffers of governments. I think it accounts for maybe 10% of global riches. So the money is elsewhere. There lies also a responsibility. So I think that when you put it all together, leadership, knowledge, being intentional about solving the problems in the future, you start seeing things in a different way, in a freer way. We free ourselves just theoretically of some dogmas. Then there are things that we start seeing, not because we make them up. They're there, but they're not seen. In a way, what I was saying before, there are in the system things that want to emerge, want to be done. I think it's a question of focus, where you put the focus. Going back to our work, librarians, archivists, knowledge keepers in the system that is our system, the United Nations system, need to be intentional about this, because the time of knowledge is now. Before we had the time of information, maybe, and even before we had the time of understanding, the transition between big powers, dynamic, and I wouldn't say the democratization of international affairs, because they're not democratic, but they're more multipolar, if you want. They're more globalized. And so how is it possible that we conceive of our jobs in the UN today, in any field, knowledge, political affairs, peacekeeping, as we did in the 40s? If the world has changed that much, then our approach to our work has to change a fraction of that much, simply said. So as professionals, when we look at that, we can have a measure of where we are readying ourselves for what's to come, or sitting and not doing the work. This is something that I think is really present in my mind as I leave the system, is how do we know that we're doing the work? Yeah.
I've always very much appreciated the way that you question things just for the sake of getting a new perspective and exploding the way that we're thinking to come to something else. And I was going to end with, what needs to evolve, but you've answered that. So I'm going to leave it to you, Francesco. How would you like to close this conversation?
I would like to close it the way I closed my career with the UN, with optimism and hope for the future. I think that we humans have many things that makes different from other living species and machines, if you want, even the most developed artificial intelligence I can imagine now. We have, not all of these things are used for good, I admit, but one of these things that is used for good and keep us thriving as humans, no matter how bad the situation we got ourselves into, is hope. And I think that when I speak to my students in my masterclasses, I tell them, you're young, so you have a duty of hope. If you stop hoping, then the food chain stops, there is an interruption of hope in the food chain. So when you're young, you have a duty of hope. But as international civil servants, we have a duty of hope, and an international system has to serve the greater good and do the work that needs to be done. I am optimist that this work will eventually be done. So to all my colleagues in international organizations, I want to say, stay put, do the work that you have to do, because you know the work that has to be done. And it's too easy to say the greater powers don't want me to do this way. It's too easy. We have to continue and be intentional to do the work. So the first thing is optimism, and the second thing is hope. And this is how I'm walking out of the gates of the UN tomorrow. I have not been abated. I'm not being saddened by all the things that I've seen not working in the UN. I am encouraged that we made it this far, and I have hope that we can go even further. True, time is very short. We used to have a lot of time in the 60s, and the way we squandered that time between the 60s and the 2000s is absolutely horrible. But that, in my optimistic mind, is a reason for us to wake up and say, whoops, we're running out of time. And I think humans of our species actually get the best of them in the last 5 minutes of the challenge. This is who we are. So I think just, let's not break systems. Let's not go to war. Let's not waste resources in games that are 1,000 years old. Let's free ourselves of dogmas in international relations that are half a millennium old. They're worth very little if we only stop praying to them. And let's march forward together because we're together. That's the meaning. One of the most powerful sentences I heard from Secretary General said, there's no planet B. How powerful is that? How integrated in our actions is that, though? So optimism and hope, yeah.
Absolutely with you on those two. But I will say on a personal level, I think you have brought humility and also fun to the work. And this certainly has been fun too.
Yeah, fun is very important. I said it yesterday, right, for the last time, and I'm going to say it to the podcast for the last time. You need to have fun at work, and you need to do it very seriously. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Francesco.
Great pleasure. Thank you.